Hi and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Black Mirror Season 4 Episode 5 Metalhead. This video is a part of a series of videos where I cover Season 4 of Black Mirror one episode at a time. This video is where I cover the episode Metalhead, so I have to start with a spoiler warning for Metalhead. If you haven't seen this episode, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. However, this video will not spoil any other episode of Black Mirror, so if you haven't seen all Black Mirror, as long as you've seen Metalhead, this video will be safe for you. Now, I mentioned before that there are a wide variety of opinions on which episodes of Black Mirror are good and which ones aren't, and that varies greatly as Black Mirror by its nature is diverse, so different episodes will appeal to different people. However, in general, the most common reaction I've seen is that Metalhead is the least favorite episode of the season, many not being as big on this episode as the others. In fact, I saw several opinions that outright hated this episode and stated that it was the worst of the entire show. But on the other hand, it seems to be a common minority opinion that love this episode, as I've seen several state this was one of the best of the season, and one person who even put this in the top 3 best episodes of the entire show. But that opinion does, to me, appear to be outnumbered by those who did not like this episode or otherwise thought it was a bit subpar. So in other words, it appears to be a very niche episode. And that kind of makes sense to me because this episode, probably more than any other, is very different in tone to almost every other episode of Black Mirror. Because typically when one thinks of Black Mirror, they think of thought-provoking, complex episodes that make you think and have a lot of great character interactions, whereas this episode is much more simplistic in its approach. The majority of the episode follows one character who is alone fighting for survival, so we get few character interactions. Also, it's simplistic in the sense that it doesn't do much in terms of world building and instead focuses primarily on the simple plot of a woman trying to survive against an unstoppable killing machine. In fact, I've heard many complaints that they wish a lot more about the situation depicted here was explored. Such as, how did the mechanical dogs take over, just how many humans are left alive, where do they live, why were they venturing out without weapons, just how fragile is the human survival, and are the dogs intelligent or self-driving creatures, or is someone controlling them? Now, while this episode doesn't directly answer any of these questions, I think a lot can be inferred. In fact, I'd say overall this episode does do world building and it does make commentary on modern technology and society. It's just a lot more subtle and beneath the surface, and a lot needs to be read between the lines. Now, this isn't something I normally do, as I'm saving talk of the Easter eggs depicted in the episode Black Museum for my coverage of that episode. However, one Easter egg I want to mention here, as I do think it adds a lot to this episode, is there's a ticker in the newscast that someone is watching in that episode that states autonomous military dog robot unveiled. Now, I'll save my talk about a shared universe for my discussion of that episode, but assuming this is a timeline, that shows that the dogs are military devices intended for combat. In fact, one can assume it's the evolution of a mass project as depicted in the Season 3 episode Men Against Fire, where they've done away with using humans altogether and moved on to artificial intelligent autonomous robots. And one can infer that sometime between that newscast and this episode, the technology has gotten away from them somehow and has run amok. Also, it is stated that the robot dogs in this episode is inspired by the Boston Dynamic robot dogs that, as of now, they do look similar. However, they have like much slower and clunky reactions. But it's not far-fetched to assume that this technology could advance to be an ultimate killing machine, as in fact Boston Dynamic dogs are being created for military use. And the fact is, the possibility of a robot apocalypse is getting closer to becoming a possibility than it has before. As a noted entrepreneur, Elon Musk is very vocal about warning against a robot apocalypse, and while many headlines like to mock him or make jokes about the Terminator, the realities of this occurring may in fact be a lot closer than most people think. Writer Charlie Brooker confirmed that this episode was in fact inspired by the Boston Dynamic dogs, which he described as looking terrifying, as he thought if they could be autonomous and self-operating at one stage, how frightening that would be. Now the question has been raised of, are humans operating the robot dogs, and is the harsh landscape we see the result of war, or have the dogs become sentient and decided to wipe out humanity, kind of like the machines in the Terminator or the Matrix? My read on it was the dogs are intelligent to an extent, but aren't necessarily sentient as we understand it, and they are operating more on an animal instinct to kill anything they come across as they were programmed to, rather than any intelligent desires to be free or take control. And as to the question of why, I would say it's a tale of something having gone wrong, where the military lost control of their weapon that they thought was so smart and ended up backfiring and wiping them all out. So it's more of a malfunction that became widespread, or perhaps a misuse in the technology that unintentionally resulted in the robot dogs killing any human they see. Charlie Brooker did mention in an interview that in an earlier draft of the script, the concept was considered of showing a human operator on an offshore island operating the dogs from the comfort of his own home, but the concept was abandoned as Brooker thought it distracted rather than added to the story. Interviews with the director would suggest that the intention behind the finished product were that the dogs were autonomous and not being controlled by humans, and they have simply run amok, which I think actually makes the things a lot scarier. So if you think about it, this does fit the Black Mirror model, despite the fact we never got an episode that was this far removed from modern day society, as typically episodes bears closer resemblance to modern times but feature an advanced technology. Here the entire landscape of human existence has changed. However, seeing how these military dogs are similar to the Boston Dynamic dogs, it is in fact doing what Black Mirror always does, taking a modern technology and showing a possible progression of that technology and exploring the negative effects this could have on society and interpersonal relationships. Getting more specifically into the episode itself, it does appear to be very minimalistic, as it follows mostly just one character. It's in black and white, and we never see the place that Bella and the other characters come from, or get any idea on how widespread the robotic apocalypse is. And I think that's fine, although it's a turn for Black Mirror. But if you think about other post-apocalyptic stories like The Walking Dead, The Road, or Mad Max, all of these are pretty simplistic as well and focus primarily on how to survive the harsh environment. So I'd say Metalhead is in good company, and I'm a bit perplexed on how some expect more out of it than they would with something like The Walking Dead or Mad Max. But then again, I suppose it's because it's an episode of Black Mirror, and that comes with some expectation of complex storytelling. But I myself am open to the show trying different story tactics, as Brooker himself said that this episode was an attempt to try something new, more specifically an episode that was mostly silent in terms of dialogue. The most common comparison made to this episode is the Terminator, and I can certainly see why, because the plots are very similar, as it's about a human trying to survive from an unstoppable machine whose sole function is to kill them. However, stylistically, the episode takes more inspiration from classic horror thrillers. I'm reminded a lot of Hitchcock movies like Psycho and The Birds, while I've heard another reviewer convincingly describe similarities between this episode and Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Whereas in an interview with director David Slade, he mentioned that Brooker was specifically inspired by the style from classic Spielberg thrillers like Jaws and Duel. All these comparisons, I would say, are very valid, as it does very successfully capture the style and feel of classic thriller in a very successful ways through the use of music, cinematography, editing, and overall craft. It is, in fact, one of the things that I love most about this episode, and that, for me, makes it stand out as one of the great episodes of Black Mirror, because it certainly has a more cinematic feel than most episodes. For example, the scene at the beginning of the episode where the dog makes its first appearance in the warehouse and we get a slow motion shot of Bella screaming is one of the most beautifully shot scenes that I've ever seen, and it is a true work of art, and moreover, combined with the chilling violin music, has an overall extremely effective horror scene, probably one of my favorites ever. The one complaint I had about this episode, though, was that it was in black and white. Now, generally speaking, I am not a fan of anything released after the 70s being made in black and white, because this just seems to me like a shortcut to appear to be all artsy. Oh, look, it's in black and white. Isn't that artsy? So for me, it often just comes off as pretentious, like someone trying to be artsy rather than actually being artsy. There are, of course, exceptions to this rule, like Schindler's List, but generally speaking, I don't think there's any actual need to have your film or show in black and white other than an obvious attempt to shout out how artsy you are, and I do think that applies here, as I would have thought this episode would have actually been much more impactful had it been in color. Now, one possible reason given as to why it's in black and white is that the future it depicts is so bleak, and so it emphasizes the hopelessness depicted in the setting. But that's a bit on the nose, don't you think? I'm actually a huge fan of contrast, and to me it would have been much more powerful had we seen a full, colorful background in this bleak setting, and the contrast, I feel, would have been actually a lot more powerful. Another possible reason is that it was trying to evoke the style of classic cinema, as I mentioned earlier, which it also does with the music. And to be clear, I have no issue with this use of classic cinema style music, but again, the whole black and white thing is a bit too on the nose, and it's too obvious that it's trying to be like classic cinema, which I think would have come off better had it been in color. Now, I've heard some state the possibility that the reason it's in black and white is so the CGI effects would be cheaper to do, but Charlie Brooker himself dispelled that notion, saying that that wasn't a consideration at all, and moreover, it wasn't cheaper to do these special effects in black and white. Either way, the episode would have been more impactful to me had it been in color. Another complaint I heard leveled at this episode is that the characters weren't relatable and you didn't really care what happened to them. In fact, I have a friend who even went as far as to say that they were actively rooting for the dogs to kill her. Maybe it's just me, but I was totally invested in the character and really felt for her just for the sheer impossibleness of her situation. Plus, you can infer that she is a member of a band of the few last surviving humans, which makes you feel for her plight. Also, the fact that she was willing to risk her life to give a dying child comfort does come to me to make her a lot more relatable and someone you could sympathize with. On top of that, the few scenes we get with her talking on the radio I thought were really powerful and great acting that accurately depicted the sorrow and hopelessness of her situation and really get you to feel for her. The final radio call at the end of the episode when she knew she was going to die was particularly heart-wrenching and I thought extremely powerful drama. Also, I liked the fact that the people she was talking to were unable to respond, most likely out of fear that the dogs would find them. In the first call, we did get a clear sign that they were listening, but in the second call, we don't even know if they were listening. And so we could just get her perspective where we don't know if anyone is hearing her last moments of life before she dies, which to me makes this scene all the more powerful. That being said, I was really curious about the place that these humans live and what makes them safe for the dogs. Are they in a bunker? Or are they in a secure facility protected from the dog's programming somehow? I wouldn't have mind knowing this, but I don't think it necessarily hurts the episode by not knowing. I just feel it might have added to the episode if we did know that. As for the big reveal at the end of the episode, that what they were going after wasn't food or medicine or other valuable supplies, but simply a teddy bear, I wasn't that big of a fan of this twist, to be honest. I mean, it did seem a bit too obvious of an attempt at irony, and I don't think it added much to the story. I mean, I do think it brings an aspect of how bleak their lives are, that a teddy bear could make that big of a difference, but the way they revealed this as some big shocking twist felt a bit contrived, because I don't think it was. Anyway, my rating for Metalhead out of 10 is an 8, extremely good. I felt this was an extremely effective, edge-of-your-seat thriller, which had my heart racing throughout, and its bleak and hopelessness serves as a powerful warning against the dangers of giving in too much to powerful technologies and not being more careful with them. And the style of this episode was simply amazing. The music, the cinematography, the acting, some of the best the show has ever done. That really separates this episode apart from the others and gives it a very unique and special style. However, it did not need to be in black and white, and this attempt to appear artsy, I think, only diminished the effectiveness of this episode, and as thrilling and suspenseful as the story was, it can come off as dull sometimes, such as when she was stuck in a tree, and that time would have been better spent on world building, but still a very powerful and well executed episode. So that's it for my review of Metalhead. I will be back in a few days to review the final episode of Season 4 of Black Mirror, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. Also be sure to check out my channel as I do many more videos on shows like Star Trek, Game of Thrones, The Expanse, Discovery, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.